Aiden stared at the invitation in their hands, the bold letters marking the most significant day of their life. Graduation. 4 years of late nights, relentless studying, and challenges that had often seemed insurmountable. Yet, here they were, on the cusp of something monumental. The excitement buzzed in their chest, tempered only by a gnawing feeling in the pit of their stomach.
Which city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And hey, make sure you watch till the end. Something's going to happen that you won't see coming.
The past 4 years hadn't been easy, especially when it came to their relationship with their father, Keith. Aiden had worked tirelessly to prove themselves, hoping for some acknowledgement, some recognition from the one person who should have been their biggest supporter. Instead, Keith's attention had always been elsewhere, on Bryce, Aiden's younger brother, whose soccer career seemed to consume their father's every waking thought. Aiden had invited both parents to the graduation, but deep down, they had a sinking suspicion that Keith wouldn't show. It wasn't that Keith didn't care. It was just that he always seemed to prioritize Bryce's games over anything else. The thought of walking across that stage without Keith in the audience made Aiden's throat tighten. The silence between them had grown deafening over the years, and Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that they would never measure up to the expectations that Bryce, the golden child, seemed to meet so effortlessly. Maybe he'll surprise me, Aiden thought bitterly, forcing a smile. But deep down, they already knew the answer. The day of graduation arrived, and Aiden woke up to the realization that their father had not even acknowledged the event. Keith had sent a quick text the night before, apologizing for not being able to make it, citing Bryce's important soccer match. But Aiden knew it wasn't just about the match. It was about the years of neglect that had led them to this moment. Keith's absence, while painful, was expected. Aiden tried to mask the hurt as they prepared for the ceremony, dressing in the cap and gown, but the weight of disappointment weighed heavy on their chest. Their mother, Claire, had tried to comfort them the night before, telling Aiden that Keith felt conflicted. But it didn't matter. Keith's priorities had always been clear, and Aiden's graduation was just another example of how little they mattered in their father's eyes. As Aiden walked into the stadium, the sounds of applause filled the air, but it was distant, muffled, by the ache in their heart. The familiar faces of classmates and faculty didn't bring the excitement they had expected. Instead, Aiden's eyes searched the crowd, hoping to see their father. But he wasn't there. The moment Aiden walked across the stage receiving their diploma, they felt a surge of both pride and sorrow. For years, they had fought to achieve something for themselves, to make their parents proud. But today, it felt hollow without Keith's presence. They had done it. But in that moment, Aiden realized that it wasn't just for their father anymore. It was for them. The ceremony marked not just the end of college, but the beginning of a new chapter, where their worth no longer depended on their father's approval. Aiden stood tall, holding their diploma, no longer waiting for someone else to validate their success. Aiden sat in the quiet of their room, the graduation ceremony a distant memory, the euphoria already fading. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Claire. "Hey, honey. I just wanted to check in. I know today wasn't easy without your dad there." Aiden let out a breath, not sure how to respond. "Yeah. It was what I expected," they said, trying to keep their voice steady. "He wasn't there. Again." Claire's voice softened. "Aiden, he regrets it. He really does. He doesn't know how to express it. But he's feeling it now. I know he made a mistake." Aiden felt a pang in their chest. "But he always says that, Mom. Every time he messes up, it's always, 'I'm sorry. I'll do better next time.' But it never changes." "I know," Claire replied gently. "But you have to understand, Keith loves you. He just doesn't always know how to show it." He's been focused on Bryce for so long, he's lost track of everything else. Aiden's fingers tightened around the phone. Well, I don't need him to show it. I need him to be there. There was a long pause on the other end. I'm sorry, Aiden. I really am. But your dad is hurting too in his own way. Please, don't shut him out completely. Aiden swallowed hard, the words hanging in the air. I just don't know, Mom. I don't know how to forgive him. The conversation ended with no resolution, but Aiden knew deep down that no amount of words from their mother would change the fact that they felt completely invisible to Keith. Keith sat in the stands, eyes glued to the soccer field as Bryce sprinted across the grass, determined to win the game that would potentially decide his future. But something felt off. Bryce missed a key pass, his frustration apparent as he kicked the ground in anger. Keith's chest tightened as he watched his son struggle, the pressure mounting in the air. He had always been so sure that Bryce's career was their family's ticket to success. The game ended with a loss, and the defeat hit Bryce hard. Keith tried to console him, but Bryce wasn't having it. You can't keep doing this, Dad, Bryce snapped, his voice edged with frustration. You push me, but it's never enough. Nothing's ever enough for you. Keith felt a stab of guilt, but he quickly masked it with anger. You think this is easy for me too? I'm just trying to help. No, you're trying to control me, Bryce shouted, his face red with emotion. You've spent my whole life telling me I'm not good enough unless I win for you. But I'm done. I'm done. Bryce stormed off the field, leaving Keith standing there, a mix of confusion and regret swirling inside him. He couldn't understand why Bryce was pushing him away, why nothing he did seemed to be enough. But in that moment, Keith realized that maybe it was his own choices that had pushed Bryce to the brink. The weight of it all felt suffocating. The silence in the car was deafening as Keith drove Bryce home, the tension between them thicker than ever. Bryce stared out the window, arms crossed, not saying a word. Keith could feel the walls closing. In around them, the fracture in their relationship growing more evident with each passing moment. I'm sorry about the game, Bryce, Keith finally said, his voice tentative. We can talk about what went wrong. Bryce scoffed, shaking his head. It's not about the game, Dad. It's everything. You've spent my entire life pushing me to be something I'm not. Always telling me I need to be the best, to win, to prove something. Keith's heart sank. I just want the best for you, son. Bryce turned to face him, his eyes cold. The best for you, maybe. You've always wanted me to be your success story, your redemption. But I'm not your project. I'm not a trophy to be won. Keith's throat went dry. For the first time, he saw his son not as an athlete, not as a future champion, but as a person who had been shaped by his relentless pressure. And for the first time, Keith understood that Bryce was angry, not just at the loss, but at him. Keith paced back and forth in his living room, his thoughts spiraling. The weight of everything, the game, Bryce's anger, and Aiden's absence, felt unbearable. He knew he had messed up, but the realization of how far gone things were hit him hard. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Aiden. We need to talk. A knot formed in Keith's stomach. He had been avoiding this conversation for too long. Reluctantly, he picked up the phone and called Aiden, hoping for some sign that things could be repaired. Aiden answered quickly, their voice colder than Keith had anticipated. What do you want, Dad? I know I've messed up, Aiden, Keith said, his voice cracking with sincerity. And I'm sorry. I should have been there for you at graduation. I can't fix it, but I want to try. Please, I just want to talk. Aiden paused before responding, their voice tinged with bitterness. You can't just apologize and think everything's going to be fine. You've missed too much, Dad. You can't keep pretending you didn't hurt me. The words stung, but Keith knew they were true. I know, but I'm here now. Let me come by. I'll listen. No excuses. Aiden hesitated, and Keith could hear the internal struggle. Finally, Aiden sighed. Fine, but don't expect anything to change overnight. When Keith arrived at Aiden's apartment, the coldness between them was palpable. They sat across from each other, the silence heavy. Keith had never felt more distant from his child, but he was determined to bridge the gap, even if it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The conversation that followed was painful, full of harsh truths that Keith had avoided for years. Aiden spoke of the years of neglect, of how they had always been second to Bryce in their father's eyes. Keith listened, feeling the sting of every word. The realization that he had let his obsession with Bryce's future overshadow Aiden's needs was crushing. I never wanted you to feel second-rate, Keith said quietly, his voice full of remorse. But I see now that I've treated you that way, and I hate myself for it. Aiden's eyes softened, but there was still a wall between them. It's not just about you being there, Dad. It's about you showing up day after day for me. I had to do everything on my own. I was never enough for you. Keith couldn't argue with that. His mind flashed back to all the times he'd chosen Bryce's games over Aiden's life events, all the times he had assumed Aiden would always be fine, that they didn't need his attention. I don't expect you to forgive me today, Keith continued, but I want to do better. I want to be there for you. Both of you. Aiden stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. I don't know, Dad. You've hurt me for so long. I'm not sure I can just forget all of that. Keith nodded, swallowing hard. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me try. After the conversation with Aiden, Keith found himself alone with his thoughts. The weight of his failures, not just as a father but as a person, crushed him. His fixation on Bryce had blinded him to the emotional toll it had taken on his family. Bryce, the golden child, had never asked for the pressure Keith placed on him, and Aiden, always overlooked, had silently suffered, never once complaining, never once asking for the attention they deserved. Keith sank into his couch, his hands shaking. His entire life had been built on the idea that success, Bryce's success, was the only thing that mattered. He had believed that if he could make Bryce into a star, everything would be okay. But in the process, he had lost sight of the people who truly mattered. He had lost his children. The realization was sharp, cutting through the fog of his pride and selfishness. It was too late to undo the damage, but Keith now understood that his pursuit of success had left him empty. The accolades, the wins, the trophies, they all felt meaningless now. His family, his relationship with Aiden and Bryce, was what truly mattered, and he had nearly destroyed it. Keith stood up, pacing again. He needed to fix this. He had no idea where to begin, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to make the effort. He had to prove, not with words, but with actions, that he was capable of change. Keith sat at his kitchen table, the phone in his hand, but his mind was elsewhere. Aiden had been distant in the days since their conversation. Keith could feel the hesitation in every word they spoke. He knew they were still processing everything, still hurt, and perhaps even angry. But he couldn't sit idly by anymore. The call to Bryce had gone unanswered, and Keith had no idea what to say to his son anymore. He had pushed Bryce too far, too hard, and the bond they had once shared was fraying at the edges. Keith wanted to fix things with both of them, but the realization that his children had grown up resenting him was more than he could bear. The weight of the years wasted on his obsession with Bryce's career hit him with full force. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Aiden. We need to talk again. Keith's heart leaped, but this time, there was no hesitation. He immediately called Aiden back, knowing that whatever came next, he had to face it. Aiden picked up after a few rings. "Dad." "Aiden," Keith said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I've hurt you and I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to try. I need you to know that." Aiden was silent for a moment. When they spoke again, their voice was softer. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad, but I'm not shutting you out completely. Let's just take it one step at a time." Keith closed his eyes, relieved but uncertain. One step at a time. That was all he could ask for. Keith knew that fixing things with Bryce would be more difficult. Bryce had always been the one to carry the weight of Keith's expectations. The unspoken pressure to succeed, to be perfect, had worn him down. And now, Bryce was silent. No calls, no texts, just the cold distance that felt impossible to cross. Keith's mind wandered back to the years when Bryce had been just a child, when everything had been so simple. Bryce had looked up to him, had wanted to please him, to be his hero. But somewhere along the way, Keith had lost sight of that. He had turned Bryce into an athlete to be shaped, not a son to be loved. Keith had made all the wrong moves, and now it was too late. Bryce's words echoed in his mind. I'm done. Keith had no idea how to make things right, but he was determined. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for a future where he wasn't just a distant memory to his son. The phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a text from Bryce. "We need to talk, too." Keith's heart raced. Could it be the breakthrough he was waiting for? Keith arrived at the cafe where he and Bryce had met countless times before. The table in the corner, where Bryce used to sit with excitement, now felt like a place of judgment. Keith wasn't sure what to expect, but the silence between them was unbearable. Bryce arrived, his expression unreadable. He sat down slowly, avoiding Keith's gaze. For a moment, neither spoke, the years of strained communication stretching out like an insurmountable gap. "I don't know how to make this right, Bryce," Keith said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "I've pushed you for so long, and I've hurt you in ways I never realized. I'm sorry. I failed you as a father." Bryce looked at him then, his eyes searching Keith's face. "You always say you're sorry, Dad, but you never change. Every time I failed, you were there to remind me that I wasn't good enough. It felt like nothing I did would ever be enough for you." Keith's throat tightened. "I know, and that's on me. I thought I was helping you, but I was too focused on my own dreams, on the idea of success, to see what you really needed. You needed me. You needed my love, not my pressure." Bryce looked down, a flash of vulnerability passing through his eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I'm not sure if I can ever trust you again." Keith nodded, understanding. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today, but I want you to know that I'm going to be here for you, without any conditions. I'm going to try, Bryce, no matter how long it takes." Bryce was silent for a long time. Then, with a sigh, he spoke. "I don't know if I'm ready for all that, but I'll think about it." It wasn't the reconciliation Keith had hoped for, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Keith felt a glimmer of hope. Keith sat alone in his living room, the weight of the past few days hanging heavily on him. The conversation with Bryce had been harder than he expected, but it was a step in the right direction. He knew he couldn't rush the healing process. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. But the simple fact that Bryce had agreed to think about their relationship, to consider the possibility of forgiveness, was something Keith hadn't dared to hope for. But Aiden was a different story. Despite their brief willingness to engage, Keith could feel the emotional distance still lingering between them. Aiden had been hurt deeply, and though they were open to trying, Keith could sense the walls they had built to protect themselves. Keith knew that, for once, it wasn't about his desires or ambitions. It was about giving both of his children the space they needed to heal. The reality of his failures as a father had become clear, and while he couldn't change the past, he was determined to be better moving forward. The love he had for both Aiden and Bryce wasn't conditional. It never should have been. He reached for his phone, intending to text Aiden, but stopped himself. Maybe words weren't enough. Maybe it was time to show up, time to prove with actions, not just promises. Keith felt a new sense of clarity settle over him. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but he would do whatever it took to rebuild the trust and love he had neglected for so long. It was late one evening when Keith's phone buzzed with an unexpected call. It was Aiden. He had been waiting for this moment. Not sure when it would come, but he was ready. "Aiden?" Keith answered, his voice tentative but hopeful. "Dad?" Aiden began, and there was a pause, as if they were gathering the courage to continue. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I've been thinking about us. I know you've hurt me, and I'm not pretending that everything's okay. But I'm willing to try, Dad. I'm willing to see if we can fix this." Keith's heart swelled. He had no idea how long it would take to repair their relationship. But hearing Aiden's words, hearing that they were willing to try, was all he needed to feel a spark of hope. "I don't know what that looks like yet," Aiden continued, "but I'm not giving up. We'll take it slow, okay?" Keith's voice cracked with emotion as he replied, "That's all I'm asking for. I don't need anything more than a chance to prove that I can be the father you deserve." Aiden didn't respond right away, but Keith could hear the softness in their voice. "Okay, one step at a time." A few weeks passed, and Keith worked diligently to prove that his commitment to change was genuine. He started showing up for both Aiden and Bryce in ways he never had before, attending dinner without distractions, calling to check in without an agenda, and most importantly, listening. He made no demands, no expectations. He simply showed up, present in ways he had never been. The breakthrough came one Sunday afternoon, when Keith invited both Aiden and Bryce to his house for dinner. It wasn't much, just a simple meal, but the act of sitting down together, without the looming pressure of expectations, felt monumental. They didn't talk much at first. The silence was comfortable, a contrast to the strained conversations of the past. After a while, Aiden spoke up. "You know, I never thought we'd get here," they said, their voice quieter than usual. "But it feels different. Not perfect, but different." Bryce, sitting across from them, nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's not easy, but I think we can figure it out." Keith felt his heart swell at the words. There was still a long road ahead, but this moment, this dinner, marked the beginning of something new. Something worth fighting for. The healing had begun, not in grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but in small moments of vulnerability and connection. It wasn't a perfect family reunion, but it was a start. Keith knew the journey was far from over. Trust would take time to rebuild, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that he could be the father Aiden and Bryce needed. Hopeful that their family could heal. Keith sat on the porch, a warm cup of coffee in hand, staring out at the horizon. It had been months since that painful day when he had missed Aiden's graduation, and although things between him and his children had improved, there were still moments of tension, moments where the past seemed to rise up between them. He couldn't erase the hurt, but he had learned the value of patience, Aiden and Bryce both had their own timelines, and Keith had to respect that. One evening, Aiden called him. "Dad, can we talk?" Keith's heart raced, but he masked his anxiety with a calm voice. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot," Aiden began. "And I don't know. I still feel like you don't really get it sometimes. Like, yeah, you've tried, but there's more to it than just showing up for dinner or making promises. I need you to really understand what I went through." Keith swallowed hard, the words stinging, but he knew it was true. He hadn't fully understood. Not yet. He had. Tried. But there was more work to do. "I know, Aiden. I'm sorry. I'm not giving up, though. I want to hear you. I'll keep trying." Aiden sighed, a mixture of frustration and relief in their voice. "I know you're trying, and that means something." As Keith ended the call, he felt a heavy but necessary weight on his shoulders. This wasn't going to be easy, but he was committed to being a better father. He had to be. Months passed, and Bryce's soccer career was reaching its final chapter. The college scholarships had come and gone, and Bryce was now facing a future that wasn't defined by his athletic performance. It had been a long, tiring road, filled with victories and losses, both on and off the field. Keith hadn't missed a game in the past few months. He was there, sitting in the stands, cheering Bryce on, not with the intensity of a father demanding greatness, but with the quiet pride of a father, finally understanding what it meant to just be present. This was Bryce's moment, not just as an athlete, but as a person. And Keith was there to support him. No expectations, just love. Bryce had grown quieter over the months, but there were moments when their eyes would meet across the field, and Keith could see a glimmer of the connection they had once shared. It wasn't the grand reconciliation he had envisioned, but it was progress. After the game, Keith waited for Bryce to come off the field. He didn't rush to talk, just stood there, giving Bryce the space he needed. When Bryce approached, there was no anger, no resentment, just a quiet acknowledgement. "You did good, Bryce," Keith said softly. Bryce looked at him, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something Keith had been waiting for. A nod, a small sign that things were changing, even if slowly. The months following Bryce's last game were filled with small, meaningful changes. Keith continued to show up, not just for games or dinners, but in the quiet moments. He spent time with Aiden, learning to listen in ways he never had before. He learned to give them space when they needed it, and he learned how to communicate, truly communicate, without expectations. Keith knew that healing wasn't linear. There were good days and bad days, moments when the past seemed too heavy to carry, and others where the future felt full of promise. But for the first time in his life, Keith wasn't just focused on the next big win. He was focused on the family he had almost lost, on the relationship he had nearly destroyed, and on the opportunity to rebuild it from the ground up. One evening, as Keith sat with Aiden and Bryce, they didn't talk much. There was no grand declaration or emotional breakthrough. They simply sat together, eating dinner, and for the first time in years, it felt like a family again. Keith knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew it was a road worth traveling. He had learned that success wasn't about trophies or accolades. It was about love, trust, and showing up when it mattered most. As Aiden smiled at him across the table, and Bryce shared a quiet joke, Keith realized that this was the family he had been fighting for all along. Not perfect, but real. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace.